For the most part, we're home. We're not hanging out with other people and hearing somebody tell a great story or going to a bar and hearing a great story. So, at home, we have to make up for the need to hear stories told by other people.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
A major voice in the literary and broader world of the North Country went silent this week. Elizabeth Betsy Folwell was the longtime editor of Adirondack Life magazine, but represented much more to her adopted hometown of Blue Mountain Lake and to the region as well. Today on Northwards, we're going to revisit our interview with her from November of 2020. But first, North Country Public Radio's Emily Russell has this remembrance.
How do you write just one story about a woman who meant so much to so many people, who impacted not just journalism in the Adirondacks, but also people's lives, careers, and how we all see the park? Summarizing Betsy Folwell's life and legacy into one story seems impossible. So for help, I turned to someone whose career was shaped by her, Annie Stolte, the current editor of Adirondack Life magazine.
There are just so many facets to who she was, and she cast such a wide net. She knew so many people. It's tough, but I mean, from my perspective, she was Adirondack Life magazine.
Folwell moved to the Adirondacks when she was 23 years old. She and her husband, Tom, settled in Blue Mountain Lake. She worked at the museum and later the Adirondack Lake Center for the Arts. She also began volunteering for Adirondack Life, proofreading articles for the magazine. Its editor at the time, Christopher Shaw, says it was clear that Folwell was smart and driven. So he devised a plan to get her to come work for him.
When she left the Art Center, I asked her to write something for me, which she hadn't even been thinking about, and I kind of had to talk her into it. And the piece turned out to be as great as I knew it would be, and when I asked her to come to work for me, I had to talk her into that too.
Folwell started as the assistant editor in 1989. She then took over for Shaw as editor and later served as the magazine's creative director and publisher. Every person I talked to for the story says Folwell's greatest strength was her ability to connect with people. Writer Amy Godine says Folwell defined the park through the people and the communities she knew so well.
She didn't carry around a map in her head. She carried around her knowledge of the people who lived in Blue, who lived in Old Forge, her friends in North Creek, her friends in E-Town.
Folwell filled the magazine with those stories of business owners, of trappers, teachers, immigrants, all of the people who make the Adirondack Park what it is. She also wrote extensively about her own wild adventures and her deep knowledge of the park. Folwell and Godine co-authored a few books about the Adirondacks and spoke on panels together.
I would have these labored presentations. She would just speak in her quiet, intimate way off the cuff. And she had people in the ball of her hand. I was just green with wonder and envy at what a natural, easy presenter she was. She was terrific.
Folwell edited Adirondack Life magazine for decades. She worked with accomplished writers, people like Bill McKibben, who described her as uniquely committed to the human aspect of the Adirondacks.
She was as devoted to its communities and their economies and their schools and their arts as she was to the views from the top of Blue Mountain or the sunset across Udawana or Eagle Lake.
25 years ago, Folwell began transitioning away from the magazine. That's when she started working with and mentoring her successor, Annie Stolte.
Her way of teaching me about the Adirondacks was to send me out of the office. And she'd say, just go drive around. Hike this mountain, meet these people, go to this event, observe, participate, and then write about it. In other words, she'd say, go live this place. And that's what she did. And that's how you get to the heart of this place.
Folwell's focus on Adirondack communities stretched beyond journalism. She and her husband, Tom, saw gaps in their own community and tried to fill them. Most recently, they bought an old diner car and brought it up to Blue Mountain Lake, which is now Chef Daryl's Diner. The two also ran the local general store decades earlier. Here's Folwell speaking about it with NCPR back in 2009.
So we were there 7 days a week in the heart of town. Tom was the butcher, cutting meat using a book that had an overlay of pages on how to cut a rib roast out of a cow. And I managed produce, and it was such an education.
Folwell took on other big projects as well, like reviving the Indian Lake Theater, helping establish the Adirondack Center for Writing, and serving on the board of the Adirondack Land Trust. A few decades ago, Folwell lost most of her eyesight. She had to make big changes in her life, and she documented some of that for NCPR in 2005.
It's hard not to see yourself in a different light if you've acquired a disability as an adult. If you're used to doing things a certain way and being independent, and then suddenly that independence is a different kind of thing. It's a matter of not being afraid to ask for help.
Over her decades in Blue Mountain Lake, Folwell built deep friendships. Former NCPR news director Martha Foley met Folwell around the time she first moved to the park.
I was drawn to her because she was just fun and a great conversationalist and a really, a good friend.
I asked everyone I talked to how they would define Betsy Folwell's legacy in the Adirondacks. As a longtime friend, Foley says her death is a big loss.
I can't find the reference to this quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, which is, when an old man dies, it's like a library's burned down. And that's what I'd say about Betsy.
There is no way to replace the loss of a friend, of a mentor, of a partner. But Betsy Folwell impacted so many people, and she had shifted her focus to the future of the park and its communities, and to the next generation of leaders, like Sawyer Bailey, who heads 80K Action.
She had such a light in her eyes about the future. I knew that she felt like these communities are so strong and have so many years ahead of them of growth and richness.
Folwell's legacy also lives on in the Small Wonders Fund, which she created and will be managed by the Adirondack Foundation. The foundation's executive director and Folwell's longtime friend, Callie Brooks, says it will help fund the Adirondack Land Trust, the Adirondack Center for Writing, and other projects she was passionate about.
She's going to invest in EMT and paramedic training for Hamilton County residents. She's very involved with this effort to restore the Tuscarora steamboat in the community. So, she's just somebody who's always thinking about what is special about this place and how can I help bring that forward so it's even better.
Folwell kept working until the very end of her life, kept sharing ideas and even pitching stories. Adirondack Life editor Annie Stolte says Folwell had 4 more stories she planned to work on for the magazine.
So even though she was sick and she was going through so much, she was still thinking of what she wanted to write about, and we were still discussing pieces. And, I look at the storyboard and her name is still there.
From her first day in the park to her last, Betsy Folwell remained deeply devoted to this place. And her legacy lives on through her written words, through her community work, and through the people who knew her. Emily Russell, North Country Public Radio.
That's NCPR Adirondacks reporter Emily Russell reporting on the life and times of Betsy Folwell, who recently passed away. We spoke with Betsy Folwell on this show back in November of 2020 during the depths of the COVID pandemic. You might remember those were the days we were all coming up with projects to do that were close to home, maybe making sourdough bread, maybe doing some gardening. One of hers was shepherding the effort to turn her essay collection into an audiobook. Short Carries had come out in print a decade before, and it featured a collection of her writings for Adirondack Life. Here is an excerpt from one of those essays, read by Linda Jones.
Freezing points. Are we headed for Adirondack winter light? Winter lies too long in country towns, hangs on until it is stale and shabby, old and sullen. While I have no quarrel with Willa Cather's observation, it appears to me that our dreaded North Country winters are incrementally losing their grim, grinding power. Not that winter doesn't still possess the ability to catch us utterly unprepared with freak combinations of cold, wind, rain, snow, thunder, lightning, ice, warm, and everything but frozen frogs falling from the sky.
An excerpt from the audiobook of Betsy Folwell's essay collection, Short Carries. Back in November of 2020, I spoke with Folwell about how the audiobook came to be some 11 years after the collection came out in print. Betsy Folwell, welcome to the program.
Oh, Mitch, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So Short Carries is a collection that was written over the years, obviously, and published in print in 2009. What was the spark that led to the creation of the audiobook this year?
Well, I realized that my book is not accessible to visually impaired people. We were visiting some blind friends in Montreal, and, it's not just visually impaired people who enjoy audiobooks. It's everybody, people riding in cars and people who want to spend a little time in their head listening to someone read a book that they're enjoying. So it became my COVID project. It was in January that we were in Montreal, and then in March, Natalie Thill at Adirondack Center for Writing came over just before we had to stay home, and we went through the process of setting up with Audible Creative Exchange and thousands of writers to turn their print books into audiobooks. I posted a couple of samples, and I set a price range, set some parameters for what the voice would be. I wanted a woman's voice with a general accent, not a Southern accent, not a posh accent. And I was stunned to get 60 auditions in just 6 days. We got it down to 5, and then I called a friend from New York who listened, and we got it down to Linda Jones as the narrator. And in some kind of crazy symmetry, Linda Jones was the very first audition I received. And she's a voice actor who lives in Brooklyn, and she's done tons of books as well as corporate voiceovers, and speaking at conferences as just a voice. So it was really fun working with her.
Was it something more than simply vocal quality that you were looking for? Was there something in Linda's voice or something that you had in mind as you set out to turn this into an audio project that was about more than, strictly vocal range, if you will?
Well, I loved the way she delivered things. She knew a joke was coming and then delivered it beautifully. And there was really nothing that didn't seem natural. She was a very natural person reading this, much more so than I could be. And early on, we went through all kinds of pronunciations so that, let's say, Anshayota came out properly, or other distinctly Adirondack place names and people's names would be correct, because you just cringe when there's a word that's mispronounced.
What was it like for you to hear these essays written in your voice, but spoken in someone else's literal voice?
I gotta say that it was very relaxing. I felt confident that my work would interest other people, because her delivery was so calm. The audiobook has more than just the essays that were published in the original 2009 Short Carries. Because I had this new platform, I added, about an hour and a half of material that had appeared in other publications that Adirondack Life readers might never have seen. For instance, there was an anthology published by the Helen Keller Foundation, and I wrote a piece for that called 2/3 of a Trilogy. And there was another piece about searching for a lost hiker that appeared in an anthology published by Seal Press called Another Wilderness. So I was able to gather up more material that related to the Adirondacks that had not been, presented through Adirondack Life.
And at the same time, I mean, it's something of a leap of faith that when you write something with your narrative style, that the person that's relating it in their literal voice is going to capture it in the way that feels natural and authentic to you. Was there feedback you offered as the process played on, or do you simply turn things over to Linda and listen to the finished product?
We went through the full book at least twice. She'd send, a selection of files. I'd listen, and then thumbs up, thumbs down. And in general, things were spot on. So that was reassuring. I'm sure working with other people, there might be a lot more fine tuning. This was basically my voice the whole time, and she felt very comfortable slipping into that. And people have asked me, why didn't you read the book? And the simple answer is I couldn't. I don't read conventionally. I listen to my computer. And when I'm looking at something that's written, it's generally enlarged about 15 times. So to get through a book of that length would, take me hours upon hours. And even though I wrote it, I'm sure I wouldn't read it smoothly.
Sure. Do you think, is there something especially important about making these essays available in this way at a time like this for the world?
Well, I think that sales of audiobooks and demand for audiobooks from libraries has just grown exponentially. For the most part, we're home. We're not hanging out with other people and hearing somebody tell a great story, or going to a bar and hearing a great story. So, at home, we have to make up for the need to hear stories told by other people. So I think that, especially now, I think there's demand for that and increased interest.
Linda Jones, I know, also read a couple of the essays, Elemental and Seeing in the Dark, for a project called Voices of Calm. And I think we can agree not only is spoken word important, but calm is something that we can all use more of in our lives right now.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think of are these calm essays?
Oh, for the most part. They're in a scene where, maybe there are natural observations of the natural world, but I don't think there's anything terribly threatening or tempestuous going on. Maybe there's a little tension, but nothing that puts people on edge, that's for sure.
Some of these essays were written, upwards of 25 or 30 years ago, right? Do you feel like are some of these essays a snapshot in your mind of where you were at a certain point in your life?
I think that's the nature of an essay. A personal narrative tends to be a snapshot of a certain time, a certain place, and who that person is at the time. And I'd like to think that, if I'm talking about watching turtles today, well, obviously you can't do it today, but watching turtles in 2020 is not that different from observing turtles in 1990. And, there are certain episodes in Shades of Green, those are all the nature essays. But, I think there's a kernel of truth surrounding each one, and a desire to, make them connect backwards and forwards.
Absolutely. As someone who has written for as long as you have and edited and been involved in the creative process, do you have to resist the urge to go back and edit something that you wrote 25 years ago?
Well, not everything I wrote for Adirondack Life is in this anthology. I'll say that right up front. Yeah, I mean, the simple editing is like, leave it out. The only thing that I really edited from the original was the acknowledgments at the end of the book, because, more people have helped me since 2009 and things like that. So I felt the need to, honor as many as I can.
This project has happened just as you're preparing to retire from Adirondack Life at the end of the year. This has been such a huge part of your life for so long. Is it frightening going beyond and thinking of yourself without the full-time work that you've done with this magazine that so many people have loved?
Well, I'm going to keep writing. I mean, a writer, it's hard to get a writer to quit. So I have assignments for the magazine, into the next 2 years, which makes me happy. And they're the assignments for things that I really want to do, like hikes or paddles or profiles. But, what's happened in 31 years at the magazine, when I started working at the magazine, we had a typesetting machine that used a photographic process to create, something that we would have to paste up on a board with hot wax. And, time consuming. And man, when we did color photographs in the magazine, people were sending us, 4x5 or 35 millimeter slides. And those got sent to a company that separated them into the component colors so that when we printed, they would be true. And now desktop publishing is just, speeded the process up, made it so much more flexible and, I wouldn't say easy. It's still pretty hard, but it's just changed the way the whole workflow has gone, and also made it possible for something like a bi-monthly publication to be more responsive. Rather than, we do work months ahead at Adirondack Life, but if we need to change something the day before we print, it's possible.
I guess before I let you go, I'm wondering if there's anything else you wanted to share about your sense of satisfaction from doing a project like this audiobook that started for such personal reasons. This meeting you had with these friends in Montreal.
Yep. Well, I mean, I'd like to see short carries reach a broader audience, and love the Adirondack. Many of us, who are listening to the station or reading the magazine don't necessarily live in the North Country or inside the Blue Line. So it was a matter of making the work accessible without having a physical book. And that seems to be working. I was very gratified. The most recent issue of the AARP magazine, the one with Bruce Springsteen on the cover, had a tiny little blurb about short carries right next to a picture of Louise Penny's latest mystery. And I thought, wow, that's kind of great. I'd like to be on the same line as Louise Penny at least once in my life.
Louise Penny and Bruce Springsteen and Betsy Folwell, rarefied company.
Yeah, we're all going for coffee one of these days.
Well, Betsy Folwell, a delight to speak with you. Congratulations on the audiobook and on 31 years at Adirondack Life. And I hope we'll get to talk again soon.
Oh, thanks very much, Mitch. I appreciate it.
Elizabeth Betsy Folwell speaking with me in 2020 about the audiobook edition of her collection of essays called Short Carries. The book is still out in print as well. Folwell died on January 5th at her home in Blue Mountain Lake at the age of 71. You can read more about her life and see photos from links at ncpr.org.
Thank you for joining us for this remembrance of Betsy Folwell on Northwards. Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Emily Russell provided reporting for this episode, and Linda Jones read the excerpt of the audiobook version of Short Carries, a collection of essays by Betsy. Our theme music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To find more conversations and support this show, visit ncpr.org/northwards. This is NCPR North Country Public Radio.